Hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us here for Monday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Dave Percy. On the first graphic here, a windy day out over the Aleutians. We had hurricane-force wind warnings out for the marine zones for the western Aleutians there, with 83-mile-per-hour wind gusts reported at Nikolsky for a peak wind, while Shemya and AKwx had 71-mile-per-hour wind gusts. And so AKwx, the location there, is far end of the eastern Aleutians, east of Unalaska Island, and I believe west of False Pass. And then, of course, Shemya way out in the western end. So we had the 80-plus mile-an-hour wind gusts bracketed by 70 miles per hour in those locations. Otherwise, 60-mile-an-hour winds here at Dutch Harbor for a peak wind gust. And Cold Bay also 60 miles an hour. St. George Island, 60 miles an hour. And those may go higher. These may not be the absolute top wind gusts out there. The front's still approaching these areas. False Pass recording 51 miles an hour. So moving on to the hazardous weather graphic. So wind advisory out for the Western Alaska Range again. That goes into effect around midday Tuesday and then continues in at least through Tuesday evening. Winds will turn south once again, and gusts as high as 60 miles an hour through the passes west of the Tok Cutoff, and of course that means another round of warm Chinook-type winds into the Tanana Valley, and of course areas of south central Alaska. And moving on to satellite imagery, here's the system brought the precipitation. Looked like south of Palmer Wasilla, it was in the form of rain into Anchorage, kind of a big bust on the snow forecast for Anchorage, but Talkeetna did pick up about 9 inches, Palmer 4 or 5 inches, even more at Hatcher Pass. But snow all the way up over the eastern interior, shifting eastward and beginning to taper off, but lingering Fairbanks and kind of on the edge there of a area of snow that brought 1 to 3 inches here over the northwest interior, Kobuk Valley on back to the west-northwest. And then mostly just clouds here pushing into the panhandle, the front really weakening in this system. It's just mainly just clouds, as I mentioned. There is some precipitation occurring. Elfin Cove rain, while Haines reporting snow, and then getting more showery back toward Yakutat, carrying rain there. Cordova had rain that's ended now. They picked about half an inch, water equivalent, with anywhere from 2 to 4/10 of an inch of rain falling across Kenai Peninsula and Cook Inlet. Back to the west, you can see the cloud shield associated with that next pretty intense Bering Sea low here right near the central Aleutians, so they're not really picking up the strong winds that you're seeing. Definitely back to the west here, that bent back occlusion wrapping that strong north and northwest wind. Gale force gusts, 65 knots sustained there for the western Aleutians, and then the front here bringing the high wind gusts in toward Unmak Island there, Nikolsky, 83 miles an hour, and that approaching the Alaska Peninsula. Places like Cold Bay, Sandpoint, or I'm sorry, St. George, St. Paul, both islands there. Probably I have yet to see your highest wind gusts, but you will here shortly over the next several hours and maybe into early evening. Winds starting to pick up now along the southwest coast with precipitation as far north as St. Paul Island and pushing its way eastward along the Alaska Peninsula, starting to increase. On the chart today, moderate amounts of rain here for the western Alaska Peninsula associated with the front, but really the system more of a wind producer than a precipitation producer. Colder air coming in, mixed rain and snow here over the western Aleutians there to go along with the hurricane force winds. And you can see the tightening gradient along the southwest coast. But the precipitation back to the west here, actually almost up to the coastline there. So it will be eventually pushing in tonight. Same thing for Bristol Bay. High pressure developing and moving eastward there, pushing this area of precipitation, snow, eastward with it, still lingering, tapering off of the eastern Copper River Basin, and a little more extensive northway starting to end, but light snow into the Fairbanks area. Probably see a little bit of a break as this area here starts to dissipate, but a little more continuous up here with that trough. And again, some moisture sliding into the northern panhandle, but clearing out here to the west over Cook Inlet. But this high will move eastward, and eventually the clouds and precipitation will tend to move back in, definitely into Kodiak Island tonight. Look for gusty winds and rain, moderate, possibly heavy at times. Areas of freezing rain here with warmer air sliding northward. Temperatures near, that would be away from the coastline here over the interior, the upper 20s to lower 30s here currently. So it could be some areas of freezing rain, otherwise mixed rain and snow. Increasing winds, quite a gradient now pushing up across Bristol Bay, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, and fair here over the interior, and dry but increasing clouds Cook Inlet. And late tonight you can see chance of rain or snow. Mixed precipitation pushes back into southern Cook Inlet, on up into western Prince William Sound late tonight. Otherwise the North Gulf Coast remaining dry. This area of moisture left over now kind of lost its way. High pressure actually sliding over it, so not much of a wind flow to push it one way or the other. So it's just going to do a slow dissolve in place here, and actually may not completely end before the remnants of this front makes it into the North Gulf Coast there on the following day on Wednesday. Up to the north, areas of snow, a couple of troughs here, nothing too heavy, actually lighter snow. That area completely dissipated here, just some snow showers left around Eagle, maybe Arctic Village. And look for the snow shower chances to increase late tonight, possibly reaching St. Lawrence Island. Big change will be an increase in the winds there. Moving ahead to tomorrow, late in the day, could see some snow edge up into St. Lawrence Island, Bering Strait coast. So there's a winter storm warning out starting probably early evening tomorrow here for the St. Lawrence Island area on up into the Seward Peninsula or through the Bering Strait coastal areas there. Look for winds to gust up again tomorrow night. Could see gusts up to 60 miles an hour. Definitely see a big increase in the wind tomorrow afternoon, and a chance of snow by late afternoon into that area. Lingering flurries possible right along the western Arctic coast, otherwise dry over the northern interior here. And precipitation hanging up along the Alaska range, so just clouds into the Tanana Valley. Again, winds on the increase in the afternoon, gusts 60 miles an hour through the Alaska range passes. Rain heavy at times, North Gulf Coast. Not all that heavy, but Portage might pick up another 3 inches. And mixed rain and snow here, southern Alaska once again. Warm air streaming northward, so pockets of freezing rain here across the southwest interior. Chance of rain lingers here over the northern panhandle down to about Sitka or Port Alexander. And then remnants of this front, this feeds more moisture into that area, so chance of rain, northern panhandle, risk of a shower down to the south. Areas of rain and showers to the North Gulf Coast on Wednesday. Mixed precipitation, upslope areas of the mountainous terrain here. Eastern interior, probably in the form of light snow up toward the Brooks Range, Koyukuk, and maybe the northern upper Yukon valleys. General area of snow back here to the west and northwest, with the main low center tracking up to Selawik Valley, about 1,000 millibars. Afternoon winds coming down St. Lawrence Island could pick up 3 to 6 inches of snow once it starts late tomorrow afternoon and continues through Wednesday. That's what's in the forecast, and of course the wind with that will create low visibilities. Trough here keeps it unsettled along the southwest coast. Periods of rain and showers, but a lot less wind for the Alaska Peninsula. It's low really weakening now. Just call it breezy for Adak and Atka with some showers to the Pribilos. Next front, not all that impressive here. Brings a chance of rain, but not much of an increase in the winds to the far western Aleutians. And looking to the lows for tomorrow morning, single numbers to maybe a little below 0. Arctic Village, Northway, Tok could drop a shade below 0 with -2. Otherwise, single numbers lower teens for the Arctic coast, and right around 10 there for Kotzebue, Selawik, into the 20s, St. Lawrence Island, lower to mid-20s here over the southwest interior. Temperatures, don't look for much of a fall in the temperatures here over Bristol Bay or even the southern Kuskokwim Delta. Lower 30s, and then 40 for the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, near 40 for the central Aleutians, and upper 20s or mid-20s to lower 30s for the southeast coast. Highs for tomorrow, upper 20s to lower 30s here for the Susitna Valley, Manuska Valley, and Kenai Peninsula, but warming into the mid-30s down toward Kenai to near 40 for Homer, lower 40s Bristol Bay, mid-40s Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and 30s to near 40 for the southeast coast. Staying colder, as usual, up here over the northeast interior. Single numbers there, but as high as 23 over at Kaktovik Barter Island. Very mild for December, and 40s for the Aleutians. And looking at the lows, Wednesday morning, a few below zeros now finally showing up along the Arctic coast there, anywhere from 0 to 5 below, about 8 below for the eastern Brooks Range, and -4 possibly for Northway and Tok, 10 at Eagle. And kind of a range here in the upper Tanana Valley, mid-teens to mid-20s, especially in toward the Alaska range with the breezy conditions, and upper 20s to lower to mid-30s, south central Alaska, mid-30s along the Bristol Bay area. Not much of a change, near 40 for the Aleutians, lows anywhere from mid to upper 20s to maybe lower to mid-30s for the Panhandle. Afternoon highs 30s to lower 40s in that location. Single numbers up to the Arctic coast and northeast, and mid-30s to mid-40s for Bristol Bay and south central Alaska.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Area of IFR up here over the northwest interior, sliding on down along and east of the Nulato Hills. VFR, southern Alaska, but marginal VFR pushing up into Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, across the Gulf of Alaska and the northern Panhandle, marginal up the North Slope Arctic coast, marginal out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. And for tomorrow afternoon, we've got IFR now showing up on the southeastern and eastern slopes of, looks like the Alaska Range here, as well as eastern or western Prince William Sound, Passage Canal, and up toward Valdez with marginal VFR east-southeast into the northern Panhandle, VFR down south, VFR in the central interior, but front coming in starting to weaken and break up due to the mountains. So areas of VFR intermixed with marginal and IFR, and then widespread IFR from the Yukon Delta, just north of Nunivak Island, back out to St. Matthew Island. And for the following morning, we've got IFR here in northern Bering Sea, including St. Lawrence Island, up across Nome, White Mountain, and eastward here, patch of marginal conditions there in Norton Sound. And then the IFR southward to almost Kuskokwim Bay, Nunivak Island. Still marginal Bering Sea and the Aleutians, some VFR showing up now, Bristol Bay in the southeast Bering, marginal for most of Kodiak Island, and again, western Prince William Sound and in toward Valdez. IFR along and on the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, as well as the southwestern mountains here. Now IFR into the northern Panhandle. And for the afternoon, that holds here up in the north, Lynn Canal Glacier Bay areas, but much of the remainder of the southeast coast will be VFR. IFR holding Prince William Sound, western Alaska Range, another swath out here from the Kuskokwim Mountains down in towards Dillingham and Togiak, and also out here IFR, northeast Bering Sea, Yukon Delta, across Norton Sound, southern Seward Peninsula, as well as IFR across the Kobuk-Koyukuk valleys to the Brooks Range. VFR for the Arctic coast passes marginal VFR, becomes VFR for both Anatuvik and Adigan for Tuesday. And Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR deteriorating to IFR, especially on the eastern approaches here. That'll be the lowest conditions, better on the west side. Rainy, starting out VFR, trending toward IFR. It may take until late in the afternoon, maybe even early evening, but look for a downward trend there for rainy as well. Not as quick as Lake Clark and Merrill. And for windy, VFR becoming marginal VFR in the later part of the afternoon. And for Isabel, same forecast, VFR becoming marginal VFR. Looks like that moisture shoots up there pretty rapidly in the afternoon there. So deterioration of conditions, but looks like Mentasta will escape unscathed here, staying VFR, just an increase in the clouds. And for Tanita, VFR becoming marginal. Portage, marginal IFR becoming IFR. And for Chilkoot and White, occasionally, or just marginal VFR. And for the freezing levels, 2,000 feet here, right close to the Pribilofs, eastward, northern Bristol Bay, right along the North Gulf Coast, and then on down the outer coastline of the Panhandle. Surface right on its heels here at the surface tomorrow morning for all of interior Alaska, the exception being, of course, the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, and Kodiak. And then for the icing, again, moisture coming northward here, areas of isolated moderate rime icing along the frontal boundary here, but enhanced areas, mountainous terrain, Prince William Sound here and into the Kenai Peninsula, and of course on the western Alaska Range, and then just some scattered areas of icing with the main low center out across the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula. Jet stream for tomorrow morning, intense low aloft and at the surface here, holding over the central Aleutians. Southerly flow, bringing warmer air back northward here with a high over the northeast Pacific. And so that pokes all the way up to the Arctic coast, northwest 120 knots, east of the Panhandle though. And then back to northwest out over the far western Aleutians. 9,000 feet showing good south to north flow here. So the mini cold snap is over. And back to the warm air here, strong winds 50 knots right along the western Alaska Range tomorrow afternoon. Lighter in the interior, turning westerly 25 central Arctic coast. And lighter winds now for the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, still 35 to 40, northerlies 35 to 50 out over the western Aleutians. 3,000 feet south to north here, 25 knots south central Alaska. Light in the interior, moderate chop southwest interior to Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, and just about all of the Aleutians.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service with another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining me today are not just one, but two people, both with the last name Stevens, which is even more fun, but no relation. We have Eric Stevens from Dehne and George Stevens, who is a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And today you guys brought a really cool toy, or I should say tool, with you. It's a sandbox, but why are you guys working on a sandbox?
Well, it's part of our senior design project, and we were approached by EPSCoR to build this for them. They had a proof of concept that they developed about a year ago, I think, and they wanted a more robust version that they could pack onto a plane and take places, and it's a handy learning tool for kids and adults.
So you're a mechanical engineering student. You've built a traveling sandbox for the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, EPSCoR, and Dehne's facilitated this. But why do we need a traveling sandbox?
Well, the prototype was such a big hit that they decided they wanted another one, actually two, that they could that would be easier to travel with, you know, possibly marketable even.
Okay, so this is a traveling sandbox that's got a lot of bits and pieces and a computer hooked up to it. What is the computer doing with the sand?
The computer actually uses a Kinect sensor to read the topography of the sand or the shape of the sand, and then the computer translates that into information which it projects using a projector onto the sand, showing topographical lines and which is representative of the shape of the sand.
Okay, so this is a live mapping tool?
Yeah. It's interactive. As you're moving your hands through it, it is actively following and changing the lines to fit what you're doing.
That sounds like something I could have in my backyard.
Yep.
It'd be a lot of fun. So you guys had to change the design a little bit to make this more Alaska-fied, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, how'd you do that?
Well, the original was made out of basically lumber and Simpson strong tie type stuff, and we rebuilt it to make it lighter and basically more transportable. We can pack it down to a fairly small size, and it can be loaded onto a plane and flown anywhere in the state.
Which you guys did today. And you have plans to take this in other places of Alaska, right?
Yep, we're actually going to be headed down to Homer with it later today.
Okay, very good. Eric, how does this fit into science learning around Alaska?
Well, you know what? I think it is a tool and it is a toy. And it brings out a smile from an 8-year-old and the smile from a 48-year-old with that inner 8-year-old wanting to get out. The sandbox, it's an interactive learning tool that teaches us how topography in the 3 dimensions is related to, say, a 2-dimensional map. More about that later. Just like George was saying, it's got a Kinect sensor, not just for video games anymore. It can sense out the lay of the land there, feeds that information in the computer. The computer identifies that, sends a signal to a projector to send topographic lines to map over that lumpy ground. So you get a 3-dimensional topo map out of it. And my favorite thing about it, this is the thing that stops people at the trade show, they stop at your booth and don't leave, is that you run your hand through that sandbox and it responds in real time. It remaps the topography as you get to be Mr. Tectonic Plate Drifter there. You can make things how you want. Well, what if we made a really high mountain here and a low valley there, and the lines adjust to what you did? It's a learning tool because it shows you that connection between these 2-dimensional topo lines and what's really out in Alaska. And Alaska's a place with all kinds of topography. You know, we're from the Great Plains, where topo maps tend to be just like blank pieces of paper, but Alaska is particularly gifted in this regard, and this tool helps us, I think, learn more about our state, really.
Absolutely. And so this is going to enhance STEM learning, the science, technology, engineering, and math in many different locations around Alaska. Then this would be something that kids and teachers can get their hands on.
Mm-hmm. It sure is. And I mentioned the it's like flypaper at a booth that, or at the Science Potpourri when we had Greg's original version of this sandbox, and that one was made out of scraps of wood, and it was a prototype. But even that one, before it had some of the refinements that George and crew have made for this newer, upscaled, maybe a 2.0 version of the sandbox, even that one was so attractive to people. It just demonstrated that this has potential to be a learning tool, an outreach tool, an education tool that now is portable and can go places in Alaska. Of course, there's only one sandbox, can't be everywhere at once, but hopefully it gets out there, gets the word out about EPSCoR and what science is being done here for Alaskans.
All right, that sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to get my hands in the sand and try this out for myself. We're going to demonstrate this here in our next segment of Alaska Weather Facts, but before we go, we want to remind you that EPSCoR, which is a new acronym for me now, but I'm going to remember this because you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter, and I invite you to do that. Alaska EPSCoR is also something that facilitates science learning at the University of Alaska around the state, and that stands for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. So check that out, and make sure you tune in tomorrow because we're going to have the next version where we actually get our hands in the sand and check out how this works and demonstrates that topography. So for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you again next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Sea ice analysis. Not much change from yesterday. Looks a little more filled in here east of Wrangell Island, but still kind of thin on up to the north a little ways. Open water, Chukchi Sea, of course, into the Bering Strait. Still about the same ice-wise here in Norton Sound, Kotzebue Sound, and of course along the Beaufort Sea coast. Coastal water forecast, light southerlies here on the south coast tomorrow. Southeast 15 north coast with seas up to 9 feet there. Southeast winds at 10 for all of the inside waters. And seas pretty slight, 2 feet. And then for Wednesday, north 10 or variable 10 for Northern Link Canal, 2-foot seas there. Southeast 15 for Stevens Passage, increasing to 20 knots or Clarence Strait. And still fairly light winds on the south coast here with south to southeasterlies 10 to 15, picking up to 20 knots in the north coast, southeast 25 with 15-foot seas. Prince William Sound, east 25 there tomorrow, seas at 6 feet, southeast 30 for the eastern North Gulf Coast, those seas building to 12 feet. Easterlies at 30 knots for the western North Gulf Coast, kick into gale force here for the Barren Islands out of the southeast. 40-knot easterlies into Kamishak Bay with 14-foot seas. Gales for southern Cook Inlet out of the northeast. Northern Cook Inlet, pretty brisk as well, northeast 30 knots, sea 7 feet. Those come down considerably to 10 knots on Wednesday out of the northeast with subsiding seas. 20 knots south of the Forelands, Kamishak Bay, and the Barrens, small craft advisory, southeasterlies 25 to 30, seas up to 10 feet. And 15 knots for the western North Gulf Coast, but still hanging in to 25 knots for the eastern zone here. Prince William Sound, east 20 knots, 4-foot seas. Kodiak Island here on the east side, south 25 tomorrow, 16-foot seas, Shelikof Strait southeast at 30, and also southeasterlies at 30 knots for Bristol Bay. We've got gales from Sitkinak to Cape Sarachev, southerlies 35 knots, seas up to 31 feet, southeast 30 on the north side of the peninsula, there with seas at 11. And then for the Wednesday forecast, small craft advisories, Kodiak Island with 25 to 30 knot winds, seas up to 17 feet. Southeast 30 knots there from Sitkinak down to Cape Sarachev, seas 20 to 23 feet. We're in the lower 20s height-wise, and southeast 30 for the Bering Sea side of the peninsula, dropping down to 20 knots with 7-foot seas for Bristol Bay. Aleutians tomorrow, gales, eastern Aleutians south to southeast, 35 to 40 knots, seas as high as 36 feet. Storm force gusts there toward Nikolsky, but swinging around the low center right in here, north-northwest 25 to 30 for the central Aleutians, and then 40 knots out of the north and 45 knots for the far western zone, all down from what you saw today. And for the outlook on Wednesday, that next week frontal system pushing eastward late in the afternoon, that'll swing the winds around to the south at about 20. Otherwise, could be a pretty light wind day. by comparison there for the morning hours. And then northwest 30 knots here right across the central Aleutian, seas 15 to 22 feet. And small craft advisories there for the Fox Islands, especially on Alaska Island, south to southeast, 25 knots. And for the southwest coast, gales tomorrow, southeast 35, south of Nunivak Island, east 40 on the north side, northeast 40, St. Lawrence Island. That coming up throughout the afternoon, 45 knot northeasterly St. Matthew Island, southeast 25 for the Pribilofs. And then for the next day, Wednesday, north 35 for St. Lawrence Island. These winds coming down in the afternoon, maybe even below gale force in the latter part of the afternoon. Light 15 knot winds north of Nunivak Island, southeast 25 here west of Kuskokwim Bay, and east at 15 for the Pribilofs, and still gales for St. Matthew Island. And for the Beaufort Sea coast, looks like it'll be windiest on the east end here, 30 knots, otherwise coming down southwest 15, central coast west 15 on the west side. And then looks like northerly winds here for the Chukchi Sea increasing to 30 knots with 6-foot seas. Small craft advisories continue and extend up to Cape Beaufort for Wednesday there with 25 knot winds, seas 5 to 8 feet. Staying light in the north or the central coast, actually all along the Beaufort Sea coast where we see west winds at 10 knots on the east side. And for tonight, a couple of troughs, key periods of snow up in the area, northern area here, tapering off though in the northwest, south of the Brooks Range, but kind of snowy for the Arctic coast, but nothing heavy in the forecast. This area dissipating out, clearing southern Alaska, wind and rain on the increase. Freezing rain pushes into Bristol Bay, southern Kuskokwim Delta. Wind and rain, but winds trending down for the Aleutians. Moisture becomes stuck here over the southeast coast and kind of lingers into tomorrow. Dry to the south, this front pushes warmer air and a mixture of precipitation eastward.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.